time for today's perspective. The dismantling of the Jim Crow segregation system in the US, a suffragette movement giving women the right to vote, and the development of labour rights. Just a few examples of incredible change that's been brought about by movements around the world, people taking to the streets. Now, for us, for my next guest, the only way to bring about significant climate change difference is by civil disobedience. I think we can speak now to our guest. Yes, we can. We can cross to the UK. It's an expert, Oscar Berglund at Bristol University. First of all, give us a sense of what you mean by civil disobedience.
Hello. Yeah, first I must say that I don't know if that description of my position is entirely correct. I think civil disobedience is always part of the picture, but never the whole picture of creating such change. I mean, so what I talk about when I talk about civil disobedience is disruptive protest that kind of stays short of sabotage, but that breaks laws. So that is disruptive, disrupts people or things, and but that does not do sabotage.
Give us a sense of how important this has been for the climate movement so far.
So I think that we saw a real surge of this in sort of 2019. Of course, we had the climate strikers, which maybe was a quite soft kind of civil disobedience, simply disobeying but by skipping school on Fridays, and of course the sort of Extinction Rebellion, where it came out of the UK, and that then has sort of spread since the pandemic in movements like Just Stop Oil, like Dernière Rénovation in France, and through the movement of sort of A22 movement, that they call themselves, of smaller activists that do kind of try to do high-profile disruption to call attention to different climate policies, really. Now, and that's the kind of activism that has been very heavily targeted by states, by the British state, by the French state, and that the UN Secretary General took upon himself to go out and defend, essentially saying that these are not the threats to people. The threats come from the real dangerous actors are the governments that go ahead with business as usual.
You made a good point at the beginning, Oscar, when you said you're not advocating civil disobedience for climate change, but there are a growing number of activists who are saying this is the way forward for us. For those watching this, give us a sense of the difference between civil disobedience and then outright illegal activity on the streets, as you see it.
Well, civil disobedience is illegal. It's just that civil disobedience, the way that I define it, and many others, stays short of sabotaging things. So, civil disobedience, the disobedient part comes from it being illegal. So this kind of protests are seldom popular when they take place, right? But I think. And it's important to note also that it's different from, say, terrorism, right? I mean, terrorism hurts people, right? It's meant to spread terror. That's not the purpose or what civil disobedience does.
What does research tell us about the efficiency of civil disobedience, how successful it can be?
Well, so, I mean, like most protests ever, most cases of civil disobedience don't succeed in very much. But what we know is that in order to achieve anything through protest at all, you have to disrupt something or somebody. Non-disruptive protest, simply, marching in an allowed march, has an incredibly low success rate. So in order to achieve anything, you need to disrupt something. Then, in terms of looking historically at movements, then we can see that historically successful movements have a wide range of types of actors and types of activities that they engage in which, kind of disruptive protest is one of them. And of course, in great numbers as well, of the type that perhaps we see more in relation to the pension reforms in France at the moment than in relation to climate activism.
And climate activism is one of your specialisms at Bristol University, and people listening and watching our conversation straight away probably think of Greta Thunberg and that visualization, that sort of icon of bringing forward the debate, and which is obviously every time you have the COP summits is where there's some significant change. But the way you look at it, how much is driven by movements on the street when it comes to climate specifically?
So I think there's been a growing concern about climate change in a lot of countries in the world, not least in the global north in the last few years, and a lot of that has been driven by climate activism. I mean, in the UK, it was a very direct connection between the Extinction Rebellion takeover of central London in April 2019 and the increase in concern about climate change that also led to, so not just public opinion, but also declarations of climate emergency and the setting up of a citizens' assembly to try to come up with ideas for net zero by 2050. So those were kind of direct outcomes of this, and I think that's also what the UN Secretary General kind of has picked up on, that it's a lot of these protest voices that actually has brought climate change to the front of public consciousness.
We must get your opinion on the state of things here in France. You've been watching rolling protests on the streets. What are your observations? That it's an interesting moment in French politics, that these kind of moments that can be spurred by, can be started from a range of different things, really, that people get angry or annoyed about, then spill over to be a kind of broader protest against the state or things as they are. So it reminds me of what we saw in Chile in 2019, with that started off with a protest against public transport fees that then spread to be much broader protest that then led to kind of voting on a new constitution and a new government. But who knows where this will end up. Right, like you never know that, or it reminds me of in Spain in 2011 with the Indignados and the broad kind of change to the Spanish political system that brought about. You never know where these protests will end up, but it seems to me that French people are unhappy with the way that their government is going on a range of issues, and that they are expressing that in a very physical way. Yeah, and the ebb and flow of them, the ups and downs with them, having covered the Catalan elections and Catalan protest movements over the years and seeing that and the big changes there in Spain, as you referred to. Oscar Berglund, thank you for joining us, our guest, an expert in civil disobedience at the University of Bristol.